and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for a discussion about the Foreign Commercial Service at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, what we do and how we help American companies make business connection with Russian companies. My name is Jim Golsen. I'm the Commercial Counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, and let's go ahead and begin the presentation. So first I want to review the U.S. business footprint in Russia. There are more than 1,000 U.S. companies operating in Russia every single day. In fact, just an hour ago, Ambassador Sullivan here at the U.S. Embassy, myself and a few colleagues engaged with the American Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the leading business organizations in Russia. Now, of these 1,000 companies, we have very large companies like Boeing, who manufactures airplanes in the Ural region of Russia. We have Procter & Gamble, who produces many consumer goods that many of you are probably familiar with and purchase on a weekly basis. General Electric, who provides turbines and energy production equipment and life-saving medical equipment. And we also have hundreds of small companies that partner with Russian businesses to develop products for the global economy. My office here at the U.S. Embassy's job is to work with these companies to ensure that they have the information and the dialogue with the Russian government to ensure they can get product in and out of Russia, and to understand the regulations that exist from the U.S. government. In addition, we work with thousands of U.S. companies that are not currently in the Russian economy, but who are interested in finding partnerships here in Russia. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Finally, we do work with Russian companies who are interested in investing in the United States. We have a program called Select USA. And this is a program that helps foreign investors from around the world, including here in Russia, explore the United States as an investment destination. We help companies understand the regulations, connect them with state-level partners in the United States, and organize delegations to visit various parts of the United States to see where they may want to do business. Next slide, please. So quickly, let's go ahead and skip to the next slide about covering Eurasia. I do want to talk about the U.S. Commercial Service and how we are covering this part of the world, and also, more importantly, how we are represented in the United States. So here in Russia, we have the one office in Moscow. We cover the entire economy in Russia, and we do our very best to reach out to all corners of Russia with business outreach. Just in the past few months, before we had the travel restrictions related to COVID-19, we traveled to Yekaterinburg, we traveled to Kazan, and to St. Petersburg. Recently, since the travel restrictions have been put in place, we've held a number of virtual events with business communities in St. Petersburg, in Kazan, and in fact, tomorrow we're going to hold a trade mission, a virtual trade mission, with the Urals region in central Russia. So we do our very best to cover the entire country. We're certainly very active here in Moscow, but we accept the challenge that we do need to reach out to business leaders and emerging business leaders, up-and-coming business leaders throughout Russia. In the United States, we have over 100 offices in all 50 states that help U.S. companies make business connections. Now, these are business connections anywhere in the world. And in my case, I have previously served in China, in India, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Myanmar, Burma. And it's very interesting seeing what U.S. companies are looking for in international partnerships. And that's something I'd like to talk about a little bit later, and how Russian companies who are interested in working with American companies, what they should look for, what makes a good partnership between American companies and Russian companies. Next slide, please. So one of the things we are really trying to do here is to engage U.S. states with Russian regions. Now, I mentioned there is 1,000 U.S. companies operating in Moscow and St. Petersburg and a few key commercial centers throughout Russia. We are trying to broaden that number by reaching out to regions throughout Russia, but also importantly to the 50 U.S. states. And a few examples I've mentioned already. Tomorrow we have a trade mission with Texas, one of the world's largest economies by itself, with the region surrounding Yekaterinburg. This is really an opportunity for companies on both sides who have not previously discussed business to make connections, to begin forging those relationships and understanding what the other party would be interested in. In addition to this, we have connections between the state of Minnesota and Kazan and Tatarstan, the state of Alabama and St. Petersburg. And we are working to increase these connections because we firmly believe if we're to grow trade and to grow business, we have to look beyond the traditional, well-worn travel between New York and Moscow, for example. I also want to talk a little bit about, next slide, please, engagement with U.S. companies. And we do work with every type of American company possible, from the very largest U.S. companies who have issues that they would like to have clarified, either with the Russian government or with the government of the United States. We hold meetings with them almost on a daily basis. We also work with small and medium-sized companies to help provide due diligence. One of the key things we do all around the world, including here in Russia, is to help give some confidence to potential business partnerships. Anytime a mid-sized company is looking to do business worldwide, of course, they don't know that company. And one of the roles the U.S. Embassy can play in the commercial section is doing some research, understanding that company's bona fides, as we say. What's their balance sheet? What's their reputation? And that can give a U.S. company some confidence that this is a potential business partner. We also work with companies to understand the regulatory environment. Every market around the world has their own unique set of laws and regulations about importing product into the countries. And so this is something that's very important for our companies to understand and something that we work on a daily basis here. Next slide, I'd like to talk about our Trade Talk series. Now, the U.S.-Russia trade relationship, of course, has some complications, including sanctions and counter-sanctions. And we don't necessarily have the same traditional model of business engagement that you would see in other large economies like Brazil or India or the European Union. So one of the mechanisms that we have developed to really help bring together typically larger companies is what we call a Trade Talk series. By utilizing our offices at the U.S. Embassy and traditionally the residence of the American ambassador, known as Spaso House here in Moscow, we bring together business leaders from both the Russian private sector, from all throughout Russia, with leading experts from the United States. For example, later this week, we're hosting one of these events virtually because of COVID, unfortunately not to be held in person this time around, but it will be focused on artificial intelligence and the future of that cutting-edge technology and how that can be applied to multiple different disciplines throughout the business world, including financial services, which is our focus at the end of this week. How do we work with Russian companies? We engage with Russian companies in a number of different ways. We help through business service provider listings, and that's listing Russian companies that help American companies access the market. Typically, this is consultants, but this can also be law firms, tax and accounting, legal services, real estate, etc. In addition to that, we organize in a typical year anywhere from 14 to 16 business delegations of Russian businesses to go typically to the United States, sometimes to Germany or Japan as well, to visit trade fairs. We organize these delegations of Russian business people to visit targeted trade shows and trade fairs around the world to meet with pre-screened American companies. So, for example, just recently, there was something called Con Expo, a trade show in Las Vegas about construction equipment for design and building companies. We actually worked with a number of our colleagues in the region to organize a large delegation from Russia, from Ukraine, from Turkey, to visit this trade show in Las Vegas and meet with American companies that were looking to forge partnerships. Using our colleagues' expertise in the United States, we made these matches based on a good data criteria and understanding the objectives of each company, and we help facilitate business matchmaking. Very critical to note here, our office's performance is judged by very strict metrics. So of these delegations, we have to reach a certain percentage of success verified by both the Russian company and the US company. Otherwise, we don't go back to that show. So in multiple cases, we've been going back to the same show for more than 12, 15, 16 years. That means we've had a great record of success. If we find a show is not that successful or doesn't make sense for the Russian market, we don't go back. So it's a very impactful program. It's a program that our companies like because for the Russian companies, it takes a lot of the worry of logistics and time management of making sure that they meet the right people out of the equation. American companies love it because, again, it saves them time. We introduce them to focused companies that have already been pre-screened and vetted, and they know they have the right capabilities. Another program that we work on exclusively really in this part of the world and primarily in Russia is something that we call the Sabbat Program. This is the Special American Business Internship Training Program, where we offer an opportunity for emerging Russian business leaders to spend time in the United States interning or working with a global company related to their industry or business focus. This is a great opportunity for emerging business leaders to develop professional opportunities in the American economy and to develop business ties. We have more than 5,000 alumni throughout Russia who have participated in this program. I had the opportunity to meet with a large delegation of the alumni in St. Petersburg back in December. And all of them, some as long ago as 25 years, up to last year, all of them really enjoyed their experience, had great stories to tell about their time, typically in the interior of the United States. It's generally not in New York or San Francisco, but small towns in places like Iowa or Wisconsin or New Mexico. And it's really been a success. Overwhelmingly, the participants find it not only an enjoyable business experience, but a great cultural experience. They build friendships and relationships that last and business relationships that endure the test of time. So my next slide, if I could, I'd like to talk a little bit about what American business partners are looking for when they come to Russia. Really, this is true no matter what market American companies are looking at, but generally they're looking for innovation, looking for companies that have that special type of innovation that's unique to the region. For example, I visited Kazan a few months ago. I want to say it was November of 2019, and met some really cutting edge startups, just best in class, world class technologies. That's the type of company that really any global investor certainly would be looking to partner with. But that's certainly one thing that American companies are looking for. The second thing is reliability and access to markets and distribution. Now, typically, if an American company has a product that's in demand, but they don't have that local expertise or access to different market segments, that's a big barrier to trade. So very often we find American companies looking for that level of expertise. In our office, we provide something called an international partner search, where we will give a list of Russian companies that have the capabilities that American companies are looking for to provide access to markets and also that have existing distribution networks. I think many of us know that have studied business, that's one of the hardest things to establish is a reliable distribution system. So if a Russian partner can bring that kind of a turnkey solution for distribution, that's a big asset for an American partner. And finally, the key thing that every company is looking for globally is local knowledge. We tell all American companies looking to go international or to expand into additional international markets that there is no substitute for local knowledge. Many of us have heard some of the stories of the biggest business failures where people have gone into markets without fully taking the time to understand or respect the local conditions. So the key way to address that challenge is to have a local partner who really knows the lay of the land, has existing relationships, and is absolutely critical to being successful for American companies in Russia and every other market around the world. Next slide, I want to talk a bit about what the Russian business partners that we work with are looking for from their American companies. And the number one thing, again, is innovation. We take pride in the fact that many American companies lead the world in innovative technologies. And we feel they do this because they do and are open to partnering with like-minded companies. I saw this in China. I saw this in India. Two very different economies, but two economies that very eagerly wanted to partner with American innovative technology firms. Now, it's not technology transfer always in the strictest sense of the word. Typically, that's what one side wants, but it's more about an innovative partnership. When I visited St. Petersburg, I met with a number of IT companies, and I know the excellent reputation that exists there in IT engineers and software development. And that's a good example of where partnerships thrive between U.S. innovation and Russian entrepreneurs and startups. So it's that mutually beneficial business relationship that we see a lot of interest in. The second category where Russian partners come to us looking for American businesses are American companies that provide products and services that lead to efficiencies and profitability. So what does that mean? If you have a Russian manufacturer of a product that's used widely throughout Russia or maybe as a part of Russia, but they're looking to expand that to, let's say, the Eurasian Economic Union. They want to export more to Central Asia, or maybe they want to export more to the EU. Oftentimes, American companies can provide services or products that can make the manufacturing process more efficient and more profitable. We have a very large economies of scale in the United States as the world's largest economy, and the level of efficiency is very high. So we've developed technologies and services that do help companies cut down on their overhead costs, making them more competitive in global markets. Typically, you'll find that in smaller markets, there's some built-in advantage that doesn't lend itself to necessarily challenging the company's business model to ensure they're maximizing efficiency. So very often we can introduce business partners that can help companies achieve that level of efficiency that will make them more competitive once they leave that smaller market. The third thing is quality, durability, and life cycle cost. American products have a reputation as being quite expensive, which is true. And it's true because typically you get what you pay for. And that is quality and durability, and something that we talk about very often, life cycle cost. Now, this typically comes into play in large infrastructure projects and things of that nature. But essentially, life cycle cost is if you have a solution that costs $10 million versus a solution that costs $5 million, on the face of it, you would say, I want the cheaper product because it'll save me $5 million. But over the course of the life cycle of that product, you have to really take a look at the full cost. And almost without exception, American products are engineered to such a standard that over a period of 10, 20, 30 years, it does not have the same replacement cost as the lower cost, cheaper alternative found from perhaps some regional economies to the east of here. And so we try to make that case that very often you do get what you pay for. And if you want that durability and you want that reliability, then there is a greater upfront cost, but a lower cost over the life cycle of the product. And finally, Russian companies that we work with are looking for products that enhance export value. So clearly, Russia is blessed with many abundant resources, intellectual talent, and great engineered products. All companies around the world are always looking for enhancements to their product that can increase value in the international markets. So again, whether that's a service or solution that provides lifecycle cost enhancements, or an engineering service that provides a Russian product with more competitiveness if it's being sold into Japan or into North America or into the European Union. We do see a lot of U.S. companies operating and providing solutions in that regard. And with that, I believe I've reached my final slide, but I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope we can have some discussions and questions and answers. Thank you. Unfortunately, I cannot. Okay, thanks. Okay. Great. Thank you for the question. The question is, are there areas of business that are exceptionally popular with Russian or American entrepreneurs today? And yeah, there are. So certainly startups. I mentioned this during my presentation. The intellectual capital of Russia is very well known. I think most people know there's a good linkage between Silicon Valley and Russia. And so that's a heavy area of focus and attention. Also biotech, especially as we all live through this pandemic. I think a lot of startups and entrepreneurs are thinking about ways they can help address global health challenges. So IT, software development startups, and biotech are the two areas we see a lot of focus right now. So great. The second question is any advice you can give to entrepreneurs who are starting a business during the pandemic? It's a great question. What we've seen is anytime there's a disruption like the pandemic, and this is a historical disruption, we see innovation scale to a level that's really not seen during normal times, right? We're having this virtual meeting now. I've had 6 virtual meetings today. We are learning to work in a different way. So how do you harness what makes sense that's coming out of this new way of doing business? Some of it we'll go back to normal once there's a vaccine. Some of it we won't. And we were talking to Coca-Cola, the global company, the other day, and they were saying that their plan is not to go back to typical office workspace. So if I was an entrepreneur, I'd be thinking to myself, okay, let's go fast forward, next year or 2 years when we're back to normal. Companies will gain these efficiencies. So what's the product or service that helps maximize that new reality? What can I develop that'll capture that curve that people aren't thinking of right now? And there's a lot out there. It's not going to be, as we say in America, slam dunk. But there's a lot of lessons learned that have come out of this pandemic. So that's one thing in just kind of the general workplace and using technology. Of course, the distribution of medical equipment, we've seen that around the world, delays and things of that nature. I think one can reasonably anticipate that there will be an effort to fix that problem. So what kind of solution can be provided there? I think there's a lot of different things that you can, the entrepreneurs can focus on and really hopefully bring some solutions to bear that will be highly valued. Thank you. The third question, how can regional governments reach me? My email address was on the presentation. You can reach me through that or through the American Center. We'd love to work with all regional governments around Russia to make a match with U.S. states. We are committed to make a match with every region that's interested. When I first arrived in Russia almost a year ago, I wrote to all of our governors in the United States, offering to do a deep dive about Russia and the realities of doing business here. And so we've done that. We've covered almost all of our states, and so we have a group of people that are interested and would be happy to make those connections. Great. Question 4, what problems Russian business and American business face most when they try to cooperate? Well, there's 2 categories to this question. One is the typical international business complexities, and that's building trust, understanding each other's objectives. I think business everywhere around the world is relationship based. Some countries have a greater emphasis on that than others, but regardless, international companies have to build that relationship and trust. The second part of that is perceptions. There's a lot of perceptions in both Russia and the United States about one another. And unless the parties have had prior experience, navigating those perceptions, explaining the reality, and again, going back to the relationship, building up trust. Question 5, any books or courses that you can recommend to beginning entrepreneurs to read, to take, and develop professionally? This is one I think the American Center is a great resource to connect you with these types of resources. I'll be happy to share a list with them separately, and we can get that out to you. But something that's really worth checking out is kind of a TED Talk, but more for college students in the United States. I'll send a link to the American Center. But a lot of entrepreneurs that we deal with are using this platform to talk about their ideas, their collaboration, how they see things going in the world, and they're not constrained by a lot of the things that have constrained other generations of entrepreneurs. So, there's so much information that is accessible to you. Take advantage of that, and I'm happy to provide some recommendations through the American Center. Question number 6, based on your experience, how long can paperwork take in the process of, let's say, a Russian citizen establishing a business in the US? So this is a great question. First of all, I encourage you to go to a website called selectusa.gov, selectusa.gov, and that's our inward investment arm of what we do here. Couple of interesting tools on that website. One will give you a cluster map of industry data, where you can see the type of business that you're looking to potentially invest. Can tell you what parts of the country where they have clusters of those types of complementary industries. So that's number 1. Number 2, they will go into each individual state's regulatory environment. In the United States, we have a federal system, and investment incentives are done at the state level. And so states compete with one another. So depending on the type of investment, you'll find very different paperwork requirements from each state. Some states have very low taxes and very quick registration. Some states have more cumbersome regulations depending on the type of companies, but it really does depend. Now, in general, paperwork is very straightforward. Establishing a company, you would have to hire a law firm, but in many states, like Delaware, for example, one of the smallest states in the United States, you can register a company in 1 day. It depends on exactly what you're trying to do. But selectusa.gov can help you get started, and my office is always happy to help as well. Okay, the next question is, are there any obstacles for cooperation between US and Russian companies that exist today? If there are, how do you think the situation can be improved? Yes, there are obstacles with perception that I mentioned earlier, and that's a general lack of understanding. There's certainly the sanctions that exist that companies need to be aware of. How can the situation be improved? Well, we're trying to improve that by reaching out to the states and regions. I think things have been done a certain way for the past 20 years. And, again, 1,000 US companies are operating here. So that's been successful. But I think in order to grow it and make it different, we have to take a slightly different approach and focus more on the regions and building these relationships. It will take some time, but I think there's what we tell our business audience is that over 90% of the Russian economy is not sanctioned. So U.S. companies should take a look for finding business partnerships. But again, it's a big world, and Russian companies have options nearby, and American companies have options around the world. And so focusing people's attention on the opportunities and persuading them to invest the time to build the relationships is really the biggest obstacle. So it takes time and dedication, but I think it's achievable. The next question, when will American business work as before the pandemic? Will priorities of American business change? Yeah, this is a great question, and it's true all around the world, right? It's in the United States right now, there's bad cases in different parts of the country, which have slowed business operations. We don't know. I don't think anybody knows exactly when this will end. We all hope a vaccine will be developed sooner than later. And it's been a big economic impact on the world, including the United States. So this is something we take very seriously. American business will definitely have different priorities, I think, going forward. The last pandemic, the Spanish flu, was in 1918. And there's a problem where people lose that generational memory. So I do suspect the next couple of years, some of these innovations will come about, whether it's how you work differently, remotely, using technology, the distribution of medical protective equipment, the development of vaccines. The hope is that we retain this and it doesn't get lost, 10, 15, 20 years down the road when this current situation is a little bit more distant in the memory. But I do think serious innovations will come out of this, both from the fact that many people have spent a lot of time at home on lockdown. University students have not had typically the same experience. So that's a disruption, and disruption always leads to innovation. So it'll be very exciting, the companies and the entrepreneurs that come out of this a little bit stronger than they went into it. The next question, will there be any public U.S. business-related events taking place in Russia this year, meaning virtually at least? Yes. We will have, public, it's a good question. We'll have virtual state trade missions, including Texas tomorrow. We have this Trade Talk series that I mentioned earlier on artificial intelligence later this week. We are looking to develop regional virtual engagements. I've got a number of regions that we're looking at. Public, we'd certainly be willing to work with American Center and others to develop public programming. We do try to focus on those companies that have expressed interest in partnering with the U.S., but we're open to doing more of that. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation and the great questions that came in. I hope you learned a little bit about what we do here in the Foreign Commercial Service at the U.S. Embassy. And we're always happy to engage with the public. I'd like to thank the American Center for the opportunity and for the great questions. Thank you. Have a good night.